Welcome. My name is Adashima Oyo. I'm the Executive Director of the Futures Initiative, and I'm also a former FI doctoral fellow. So on behalf of myself and the entire Futures Initiative team, we would like to welcome you to this event. We are thrilled that you are here. If you are joining on Zoom, there's about 800 of you. We're also thrilled that you are here. So this is our first event that is hybrid, in-person on Zoom. It will be a learning opportunity, so bear with us if there are any sort of technical difficulties, please. If you are using social media, live tweeting or on Insta or wherever you go, please use the hashtag #NewCollegeClassroom. So as I said, we're hoping that tonight's presentation is very informative for everyone. Christina and Cathy will be available for book signings at the end of their presentation, and proceeds from the book will be used to support a Futures Initiative Scholarship Fund at the CUNY Graduate Center for doctoral students. I would like to thank our co-sponsors for the event, and that is the Publics Lab, directed by Stacy Hartman. It is the Teaching and Learning Center, directed by Luke Waltzer, and it's also the Transformative Learning inside of the Humanities, TLH at CUNY Central. Finally, I would also like to thank GC Security downstairs, and I would also like to thank all of the F5 fellows who participated in forming this event, organizing the event, and making sure that everything runs smoothly. Our fellows are sprinkled throughout the room, and we also have some fellows who are online who will be taking questions and comments. So before I bring up the Chancellor and the Provost, I want to just share a few remarks about each of these incredible men. We're so honored to have them as part of our CUNY family. So Steve Everett is the Provost and Senior Vice President at the CUNY Graduate Center. His area of academic research is music. Provost Everett has received numerous grants and awards from agencies such as the National Science Foundation, NASA, and many, many others. He has performed and conducted at venues in the United States and abroad. Prior to joining CUNY, the Provost served as the Executive Vice President at Adelphi University. He has also been a visiting professor of music at Princeton University. Now, a few words about our Chancellor. So Chancellor Felix Matos Rodriguez became the 8th Chancellor of City University of New York in 2019. Making him the first educator of color at the first Latino to lead the nation's largest urban university. Prior to his appointment as Chancellor, Dr. Matos Rodriguez was the president of CUNY's Queens College from 2014 to 2019, and of CUNY's Hostos Community College in the Bronx from 2019 to 2014. Making him one of the few select administrators who have experience leading community colleges and baccalaureate programs. In his role as Chancellor, he oversees CUNY's system of 25 campuses with an enrollment of over 275,000 students, degree-seeking students, and over 225,000 adult and continuing education students, and an operating budget of over $3.6 billion. The Chancellor is a cum laude graduate of the Latin American Studies from Yale University, and he also received his PhD in history from Columbia University. Please join me in giving him a warm and enthusiastic welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Adashima, for your kind words, and I love how you pronounced when you said Eugenio Maria de Hostos College in the Bronx, right? But thank you for also your work here with the Futures Initiative, and your work as a doctoral fellow. I think is a testament to the great quality of the program here and the transformational work that's being done. So kudos to you. I am so happy to be here for so many reasons. Even though we have, I don't know, 800 people or so in Zoom in this hybrid format, I have to tell you that I miss events in person, and it is, still a little strange, but it is so refreshing and so energizing to be able to see some of that life in the university sort of coming back. I've had the pleasure of visiting some of the campuses as classes have begun, and you can sense that sense of energy and enthusiasm of people sort of coming back together. And clearly we have learned about being able to be together in different ways now, and we are sort of, I think, having a little bit of the best of the both worlds, right? The chance to be able to be here in person for those who can be here, but in the past we would have never been able to connect with those 800 people who couldn't be here physically. So I am really, really excited about this book launch and this conversation here. I'm also so happy to be joining a colleague that I love and respect, and you may know her in her title as a distinguished professor here at the Graduate Center. You might know her as the director of the Futures Initiatives, right? I think that one of her many talents is all the many different titles and hats that she wears with joy and with distinction. And I thought she needed one more, right? Because she didn't have enough. And I was so happy when she accepted the invitation to be a senior advisor to the Chancellor for Transformation. So thank you for taking on that additional task to the role. And want to give a big shout out also to Christina. It's so nice also to be here, and congratulations also with the other life events that make your whole life complete and wonderful. And thank you for your leadership and your work here too. I'm joined by another member of this new venture that we're launching of the Office of Transformation, Rachel Stevenson, who's here, who's the inaugural Chief Transformation Officer. And we created this space as we move out of the pandemic and we go back to this sort of new normal in the university to be able to advance some initiatives with additional support, with additional attention. And I couldn't think of two better colleagues to be leading those efforts than Cathy and Rachel. So thank you both for accepting to be here. And to Steve Everett, thank you for being a gracious host here at the Graduate Center, and for all your work and the rest of the administrative team, and obviously to President Garrell, to send her my very best. I mean, just a couple of things, and I think that many of you probably are familiar with the original New College Classroom, right? Either as a result of reading it or as a result of having been part of the different projects titled here at the Graduate Center that gave life to some of the commentary, to some of the feedback, to some of the experimentation that is commented in the book. The good news is that if you read the book, you should read the new version again, right? Because this is not that you just added like 3 new acknowledgments, right? And 3 pages at the end, right? In typical, sort of Cathy and Christina style, right? They never go at it the easy way, right? They take every opportunity to create more opportunities for others to learn and to engage and to participate. And you will see that the new edition really adds, it's as up-to-date as a book can be that needs to be launched physically, right? That has a physical date of being launched, but added a lot of reflections and a lot of the feedback and a lot of the commentary that they picked up as they initially worked in the original version of the book. So let me just tell you that if you have the chance to read the first one, don't be lazy and read the second version again, because you're bound to continue to learn, to continue to grow, to continue to be inspired, and to continue to be challenged, right? To do this important work in an innovative world. I've always been a fan of the work of the Future Initiatives. I love the the focus on teaching, the focus on empowering the students and the participants and the faculty and the doctoral fellows and all the members of that. It comes in part out of a very personal space for me. When I began my teaching career, and I was a very typical graduate student who got a first job. Somebody got a PhD in Caribbean women's history and was the Latin Americanist, right? In the world that the history departments divide the world in either themes, right, or by regions of the world. So I was the person in charge of teaching courses about the Latin America and the Caribbean, but had never had any experience in a classroom setting, right? And you go on to teach, and you bring that desire to do the very best for your students, but with limited context on pedagogy. I will never forget, and my first teaching job was at Northeastern. Latin American survey, modern Latin America, from independence to yesterday, whatever the title of those courses go. And I had a student who was quite brilliant, participating, all those things, and he came, and he asked me for additional time for a test. I had never experienced that before. And my first take was to be surprised. Luckily, and I thought, he's playing me. He's playing me, right? Luckily, I didn't act on my really unfortunate first instinct, right, which would have been shameful as someone now that has children that have benefited from that, right? I go back and I'm ashamed even that I had that thought, to be very candid. But luckily, I went back to the Center for Teaching and Learning, and there was an entire support there, education for me about how to be a better teacher, in this case, for students that needed a special accommodation. And that became a journey. And I don't tell that with a lot of pride, right? Because I wish that I could travel in time and have been a far more sophisticated faculty member at that time and had known really how to react and how to signal and how to embrace. I hope that the way that I conducted myself afterwards showed that to that student, right? But I have to admit that that was not the case initially. I knew nothing about learning styles, about how students learn. I mean, you intuitively sort of thought that people learn differently, and you bring that with you, you bring that sense of empathy, but in terms of that deep knowledge, nada, zero, right? So I've always valued any investment in any engagement in my capacity to do the job of teaching with a lot more empathy, better knowledge about the students that were in my classroom, what they needed, what assets they brought to the table to be able to contribute to the course that we were building together. How could it be supportive in their journey, right? I mean, most faculty members, we hope that everybody became a Latin American historian. We know that is factually doesn't happen, right? But we have that somewhere back in our DNA. It's like, thinking that you're working with graduate students. And then how could you be an agent in the journey of that student of self-discovery, of knowledge, of creativity, of civic engagement, all the things for which our students come to our campuses and for which we as faculty sign up for, right? So I've been a deep, deep believer in this mission-critical work of engaging in better teaching and all the structures that support teaching and assessment and all the things that we do, curriculum building, all those things. And there is so much richness in this book that Cathy and Christina have put together. And also, right, not just from the experience that we have been more familiar here from the students from the City University, but in their own journey with students coming from different kinds of universities and programs, right? And how there's some universal connector themes that are there that can be applied as we think about those things in time. So as you can see, I'm such a fan that I've forgotten to sort of read the the remarks that my phenomenal communications team put together, and they're gonna go back and say, why do we even bother to write those things for you, right? But again, when Cathy mentioned the opportunity to be here, I mean, there's no bigger sense of joy when you're now in an administrative role than to really showcase and applaud the great work of the faculty that you have the honor of serving with. So it gives me a chance to do that with both the work that Cathy and Christina have done. It allows me also to applaud the whole array, Haystack, all the different other projects that Cathy is involved with, all the different learning communities here at the Graduate Center and elsewhere that we have to improve the capacity, right, and of our graduate students and of our faculty to do the work that they do. So I'm delighted to be here. I am a learner. You know, there's a number of things here that are homework and have inspired some of the things that we're trying to do in the university. And I think one of the great things about good books is that you get, and there's plenty of very concrete examples of small things you can do in a classroom. There's examples of larger things you can do in a classroom. There are examples of small and big things that you can do around programs and all of that. But one of the things that I find really inspirational about the book is that we all need additional inspiration to aspire to do more, right? And to raise the bar even higher and to do the things that you want to do for your students, for the university, for the Graduate Center, for CUNY. And it's books like this that, at least for me, right, in the very few quiet times that I have to read, and that you go for a source of challenge, of inspiration, and to support the work that is being done. So I am honored and happy to be here, and I very much look forward to one of the good things about this event. One of the bad things about being chancellor or whatever is that in your schedule, you do this thing, you shake the hands, you take a picture, and then you go, right? And I said, no. I'm staying. I want to learn. I want to listen. I want to be a participant. I not always can do that, right? But this is really one event that I wanted to be able to be with you for the journey of the event and the journey of the work that we have to do together as a university, as a community. So congratulations to you both. It is an honor to be here. And I understand that my next duty is to introduce the provost, right? And luckily for all of you, Shima gave a much better introduction that I could have given about your provost here. So you want to come on down and take the floor?
Thank you, Chancellor Rodriguez. I love the story you gave about your sort of transformation when you first started teaching. I think in some ways that's what the book is about. It's about how do we inspire transformation, and that's what I felt through the whole book was really about that. I do think the budget for hat racks has gone up since we hired Cathy Davidson at the CUNY Grad Center, because we've had to find new ways to bring her into so many different roles here. So looking forward to hearing your talk a little bit later. When I first saw the title, the New College Classroom, it reminded me of a refrain that you hear a lot of times in non-academic circles, something like, nothing ever changes in academia. You know, universities are still teaching the way they were in the Middle Ages. Often, you know, people outside the academic world sort of think that we're stuck in kind of old methodologies. And I think, you know, for most of us, when you read the book, you will see that that opinion is really unpacked by the two authors, and they have complete, convincing empirical evidence and numerous examples of the effective practice that teaching and our understanding of learning today has evolved significantly since the early days. This book espoused a re-examination and adoption of activity-based teaching methods that draw not only on contemporary research into the scholarship of teaching and learning, but an approach grounded in the best historical practices of collaborative and participatory pedagogy. I think it's the combination of those two that are quite interesting in this book. One of the most fascinating strengths of the book for me was the depth in which the authors provided a historical context for how our modern university standards of lecture-based delivery of information and assessment through grading emerged really in the 19th century industrial age and have dominated our classroom practices ever since. Quoting from the book, uniformity, productivity, standardization, and automation were all signs of modernity in the new world of factories. Educators began to propose ways of adapting the new ways of measuring worker productivity to education. In the book, they offer readers a range of alternatives to traditional grading. For example, contract grading, peer assessment, peer badging. Again, a robust participatory and student-determined evaluation systems. That's what this really book is all about. In the new college classroom, in many ways, I think Cathy and Christina are employing us to revisit the student-centered and student-engaged learning strategies that predated the industrial age economic efficiencies promoted by the scientific management theories of Frederick Taylor and others. And in doing so, they provide us with a practical roadmap for creating effective new learning environments for the 21st century student, with the students serving as the primary active agents of their own growth. During the earliest formation years of Western universities at the end of the 12th century, there were already two major seats of learning. One was in Bologna, specializing in law and medicine, and one in Paris, followed by another in Oxford, that focused on theology and the liberal arts. Many of these liberal arts-focused universities that emerged during the later Middle Ages adopted the ancient Greco-Roman tradition of student guilds, or societies of students, in which a professional or cleric would read from a text, provide comments, and then students would essentially teach each other. Active learning was already understood as a preferred learning method from the earliest days of institutionalized higher education. To quote again our two authors, this book is an invitation to change ourselves, our classrooms, our society. It is a practical book dedicated to a lofty mission, a step-by-step how-to for transformation. Taking charge, making a change, using all of our years of specialized education, all of our well-honed research skills, we are capable of changing ourselves, our classrooms, and yes, even the world. Since the intellectual humanism of the Renaissance, university education has also expected to prepare students for a civilized life and instill a heightened concern for the public good. And education for the public good is still a primary identifier of the City University of New York even today. The public good is a critical component also in this text that you find in every chapter in the book. I think they're talking about, it's not just about designing a new classroom structure, it's about really doing that for the betterment of society and for public good. That's what I really loved about this book. It's more an ethical book than it is about teaching in some ways. As we're all aware, higher education has entered a new era of intellectual transformation shaped by profound social and economic challenges, a historically unique technological acceleration, with a more comprehensive understanding of the nature of human learning and with early insights into the potentials and limitations of the new field of machine learning. As Professors Davidson and Katopodis have advocated, to confront these challenges, tradition, replication, and standardization are often not enough. They ask the reader, can academics really move from theory to actual practice, from the classroom to the world? The answer they offer is a resounding yes. A college education is crucial to develop active citizens rather than passive subjects. The new college classroom provides a step-by-step manual for reimagining the classroom experience as active citizen training, I tend to think of it. An activity-based approach built on the adage, tell me and I forget, show me and I remember, but involve me and I understand. Participatory learning requires students to take full responsibility for their own learning, and in doing so, provide them with the requisite skills for both fostering personal and social transformations. Empowering our students with creative problem-solving tools is essential to a thriving democracy and the creation of a more just and inclusive society. The new college classroom shows the readers how to use the classroom as a laboratory for creating more socially engaged and respectful societies. By exploring ways to apply these new strategies in our classrooms, The authors encourage our students to understand that they really can reshape themselves and transform the communities we all inhabit. This is truly a remarkable book. I want to thank Cathy and Christina for writing this and offering it to all of us in higher education who are striving each day to offer the best educational experiences for our students. On a personal note, I also want to express my deep appreciation to you both for donating the proceeds from this publication to the 2 grant competitions the Futures Initiative offers each year for doctoral education. Cathy is doing what she has done throughout her long and distinguished career, providing constant care for our students. Her dedication is an inspiration and model to me and for all of us. Thank you, Cathy and Christina, for generating this fantastic book, and please join in me in welcoming Cathy and Christina.
We're going to take off our masks just to speak, and thank you all so much for graciously wearing masks. I'm immunocompromised, and I'm just being careful, but thank you. I really, really appreciate it. Come up. It's a hard act to follow, right? Come on. On your seats, for those of you who are physically here, are note cards and pencils. If you hold them in your hand, they should change colors. The pencils should change colors. We figure if a pencil can change, so can we. And we're actually going to be doing 2, or are we doing 3 interactive? Okay.
At least 3.
3 interactives.
And we're going to
And we'll be doing those face-to-face and online. And now, Christina.
But first, we want to say thank you. We owe many, many thank yous to our Chancellor and Graduate Center Provost, to CUNY's Central Office of Transformation, the Office of Academic Affairs, the Futures Initiative team, the Transformative Learning in the Humanities, the Mellon Foundation, Publix Lab, GC, TLC, our ASL interpreters, live transcribers, the GC IT department and facilities, the people who set up these chairs and tables for us, and everyone who made it today in person and online. Thank you for showing up. Thank you to our families and our partners, and my partner who bounced a baby in the other room while Cathy and I were in a room typing away at this book. I'm so grateful for that. So thank you all so much for showing up. And we want to acknowledge that CUNY's many campuses are situated upon the ancestral lands of the Canarsie, Munsee, Lenape, Raritan, Wappinger, and Wequijik peoples. As members of an educational community, we are empowered to address the histories of dispossession and environmental change, and to learn from the lasting influences of Indigenous thinkers. In this talk and in the book, in particular, we're indebted to Sandy Grand's Red Pedagogy, to Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, and Max Leboyron's Pollution is Colonialism. Highly recommend all 3 of those books and more. A special thanks to the Native Governance Center for its important advice on how to go beyond static land acknowledgements toward meaningful action. We encourage you all to visit their excellent website, nativegov.org, to learn more and support their work. Cathy, take it away.
So we begin with an epigraph to Audre Lorde, who, as many of you know, was a faculty member here at CUNY, and far more than that. Poet, thank you. Poet, educational inspiration, and just a brave, brave, brave human being. The learning process is something you can incite, really incite, like a riot. We hope by the end of today that you will leave not only with some big ideas and some research, but some actual things you can try tomorrow in your classrooms, things that help us incite learning in our students, like a riot. And also, we hope that there will be a little bit of self-incitement, too. That I think it's very easy to become cynical. It's very easy to become complacent. And we can't afford that anymore, right? We know that students today are feeling very disillusioned and wondering why higher education matters anymore. I was very, very, very lucky during the pandemic because I knew every Tuesday and every Thursday I would be on Zoom with the amazing Christina Katopodis, and we would be writing this book together, right? It gave us a goal, it gave us something positive, and it gave us ways to really test what we were doing, not only as practices and pedagogies for fields, but as how oneself can be changed by learning. How learning and teaching others is also about teaching ourselves. Next slide, please. So as we often do at the Futures Initiative, we're going to start with you. So those cards, those note cards, just take 1 minute, very quick, and this is the first of 2 parts of a little experiment. What do you like most about teaching? Just jot down a few things that you like most about teaching. Just take a minute. And online, for the people online, hello out there, people online, we have several multiple choice questions because that's all we could do with the tool. What do you like most on teaching? Choose your top 3. Is it giving and writing lectures? Is it teaching seminars in your field? Is it teaching general ed courses? Is it team teaching? Hearing what other students have to say? Co-creating a course with students? Supporting the students who want to go on to graduate school? It's a poll. But here, you don't have to do A, B, C, D. Choose whatever you want. Write down what do you love about teaching? What is it that makes you want to be an academic? Again, just a minute, and then we'll be doing the second part of this exercise.
And if you're not teaching yet, what is it that makes you want to go into teaching?
Thank you. That's great.
Do you want water?
Is that mine?
Yeah.
We have some seats up front if anyone wants to come sit up front. A few more seconds, or do you feel like you've got it? Okay. We're doing an abbreviated exercise that's called Think, Pair, Share. I learned this from a second grade teacher. I've also done it with the top 100 performing CEOs of the Cisco Corporation. At my previous university, the head of Cisco was on our board of trustees, and he asked me to do this with his top performing CEOs, Deutsche Bank, Sony, all of those, because he said it's very hard to know what people are thinking when the head of Cisco is in the room. And the point of this experiment, it's called an inventory experiment, is you find out what everybody's thinking, not just the 3 students who shoot up their hand, but what everybody's thinking. Turn to someone next to you, work in pairs, or if there aren't pairs, work in 3s, and just take another minute to tell people what's on your card and make sure the other person gets to talk too. Okay, just take a minute. And for those of you online, you can just be thinking about this.
I'd be curious what the poll results are.
Pardon me?
I'll be curious what the poll results are. Good luck.
Okay, I think we'll come back to order again. Excuse me, please. We'll start back at the lecture. Excuse me. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? It took 4, or was it 5, I lost count, tries to get you to focus on me, and that is an educational victory. Right? It was a little bit of a trick. Sorry. But that's the amazing thing. When every student can contribute, when every student shares their ideas with another student, you have energy, you have excitement, you have involvement, you have commitment, you have participation, and we know, we have metrics on all of this. You learn better, you retain better, and you learn lessons that serve for your entire life, right? We've had sociologists of education who've gone around and found out that 20% of students graduate from college without ever having spoken in a class unless they were directly called on. That's a tragedy, right? What are they learning? So for those of you at home, I don't know if you could hear what people said, And I don't know if those on here actually saw the results of that poll. I think it was, I don't know if we can quickly go back to that slide. The previous one, if not, that's okay. The poll. 57% of our participants said that what they love about teaching is hearing what students have to say. 57% hearing all students, helping all students with life skills, creating communities, sharing ideas. And yet a hilarious study of professors in England, and I think you could replicate it here, finds that we talk 87% of the time, even in seminar classes. Right? But we think we want to hear. So part of what we do in this book is find methods that allow every student to contribute what they have to say. The fancy educational word for this is metacognition, where you think about not just the course content, but why you're learning and how you're learning what you're doing. And that's the lesson that lasts a lifetime. Here's another little metacognitive experiment. If you think about the syllabus you've written, or if you're a student, the syllabuses you've seen, what do you think students believe is why you're in this profession? Right? If 57% of us online said we're here to hear what students can have to say, is that what our syllabus conveys to students? I'm guessing, and we won't write this out, but I'm guessing most people, when they think about their syllabus, don't think that syllabus is designed for students to actually learn and grow and learn methodologies that will be tools for the rest of their lives. Right?
Okay. I have done Think, Pair, Share to start every class, and I apologize to anyone who has taught in the room next to me at 8 a.m. because our class was too loud, and I'm sorry. I think I'll stay here. So when people ask us about our teaching philosophy, we like to turn things around and ask, what is it our students need from our teaching? And from higher education more generally. When we sat down to write this book together, we asked ourselves, how do we create a higher education that is ready for our students today? And what we came up with were 3 types of change that we need to make, and our talk today is divided into those 3 parts: changing ourselves, changing our classrooms, changing the world. Cathy?
Thank you. So here's some basic things, sorry, for the people at home, for the basic things about changing ourselves. One, as Provost Everett said, we have this idea that higher education hasn't changed since Socrates and Plato walked around the Lyceum, et cetera, et cetera. That's not true. The 19th century saw enormous changes in higher education, and we saw enormous changes 2 years ago. In 1 week, 18 million students went online, right, during the pandemic. We can change, right? But the structures and the self-reinforcing structures of everything from our reward systems to what we count to what our prestiges are all based on a 19th century idea of productivity that was very, very carefully set out in the academy of the 1890s. Majors, minors, graduate school, professional school of education. These things didn't exist before. And keep in mind, when Charles Eliot at Harvard makes the first school of education, it's for K through 12 teachers. Explicitly, not implied, explicitly, college teachers aren't supposed to learn pedagogy. Why? Because it's the job of a college teacher to do exactly what their mentor says, to carry that research forward, and to teach the way they were taught. They were basically we, educators, were basically kept out of schools of education, a tradition that still, for the most part, lasts to the present. 3.5% of students who graduate from college, 3.5%, go on to earn a PhD. Implicitly, again, in all of those self-reinforcing reward systems, we teach as if 100% of our students are going on, right? In terms of specialization, silos, how we grade, what we count, the fact that very few of us ever say why we teach what we do. How many people really spend time talking about why calculus is important, why statistics is important, why medieval literature is important, right? We often leave out that lesson because we assume we're carrying forward a specialized field of our professors to future professors, even though that is not in any way statistically the case.
So why change now? Why now? The world is changing at breakneck pace. One massive global health crisis later, the world is completely changed in an instant, although it felt like an eternity, right? It's hard to remember that we brought higher ed online in just a matter of weeks, which is a tremendous accomplishment. And our students need to be flexible and adaptable for this rapidly changing world. And learning in school is for the world beyond. We often get so caught up in our specializations, as Cathy said, that we forget that teaching higher order thinking skills are things that students will use throughout their lives. Proficiencies in collaboration, project management, synthesis. These are the skills that we do as researchers that employers insist are absolutely essential skills for their careers. On top of that, we have different students, right? They're not the same students that they were in the 19th century or before, and I'm going to talk about our students and who they are in just a moment. We also have the research saying, or screaming, really, the research screams for decades, that there are better ways to learn. And if we can go to the research slide. Please take a moment, if you like, to take a screenshot if you're online, or take a picture if you're here, because this is the research that we show to our colleagues and our administrators about the active learning that really works, right? That it really works. And this just scratches the surface. There's a depth of research beyond this, but this is just a little bit of a teaser of what's out there. So who are our students? Of those 18 million that Cathy mentioned, more than 40% go to community colleges, 40% work more than 30 hours a week, 25% go to school full-time and work full-time, 25% are over 25 years old, 30% are first-generation college students, 24% are low income, 25% face food and housing insecurity, 58% are female, 45% are students of color, and only 0.4% attend the Ivies. But
I think about 95% of articles about higher ed are based on those 4.4%.
Right? This fantasy of who our students are, right? They have plenty of time, they go to school full-time, they do extracurricular activities, football games, Greek life. And I have a very funny story about Greek life. As the child of two immigrant families, one Polish, one Greek, when I went on my first tours on college campuses, the tour guides kept talking about Greek life, and I said, wow, my people, all these campuses have this vibrant Greek life. I'm so excited. And it took an embarrassing number of tours for me, probably 8 or 9, for me to realize that Greek life meant sororities and fraternities. Yeah. So that's how far removed I was from the hidden curriculum, right? Philip Jackson wrote about the hidden curriculum as early as 1968 in his book Life in Classrooms, and I only learned about it within the last couple of years working on this book. And so I think that it's important for us to remember who our students are and how far removed they are. When this is what we do every single day, it just comes automatically, and we start to take it for granted. And so it's teaching students that hidden curriculum, guiding them and mentoring them along the way, shepherding them through that we have to remember as we begin every new school year.
Just want to backtrack very quickly to the bibliography slide we gave. One of those studies by Scott Freeman, thank you. Thank you. One of the studies by Scott Freeman is actually a meta-study of 250 separate studies of active learning and traditional learning using every imaginable metric, including standardized testing, retention, application, et cetera. At the end of the study, Freeman says if this had been a pharmaceutical study, traditional learning would be taken off the market. So this isn't just Freire, pie in the sky, bell hooks, radical pedagogy. It's that too, but it's also the best, most practical way to learn, and very few of us, Luke Walters here from the Teaching Learning Center. I'm happy to say that we're an exception. But at many places, still, graduate students never never learn about how to actually teach and what the different methods are, other than lecturing or small seminar. My favorite quote about this comes from the very famous science fiction writer Samuel Delany. Delany was an A+ student at Bronx School of Science. He was gay, he was black, he ran, not walked, from his house on the Upper West Side to the West Village as a teenager. And by the time he was 19, had written and published his first bestseller. He didn't go to college. This brilliant man, he's often thought of as the most brilliant polymath in the country. Didn't go to college, hadn't been in a college classroom till he was 40 years old, and then was invited to teach a class at Wesleyan. He says he prepared for that class the way he would write one of his very dense and difficult science fiction novels. Really prepared. Went into class, asked a question, and was sure 100% of the students would raise their hand. It was Wesleyan. 3 students raised their hand. In a movie about him 20 years later, this is what he says. Don't you realize that every time you don't answer a question, you're learning something? You're learning how to make do with what you got. And you're learning how not to ask for a raise. You're learning how to take it. That's not good. So from now on, whenever I ask a question, everybody's got to put up their hand. I don't care whether you know the answer or not. You have to put up your hand. We need to teach people they are important enough to say what they have to say. Right? He literally does this, where he asks a question and everybody has to put their hand up, and he calls on people randomly, and if they don't know the answer, they say, well, I don't know the answer, but Con knows. And then Con gets to answer, and then if Con doesn't know, Con says, oh, I don't know the answer, but Louise knows, and Louise answers. And it's almost a game, but he also, of course, gets even more participation than ever. And the main thing is, and we know this from cognitive neuroscience, the very act of putting up your hand means I am here and I deserve to be here, and I can ask for a raise, right? Very overtly in 19th century literature on higher education, we're being told how to make a professional managerial class that will control and manage workers, laborers, right? So how do you break those molds? This for me is one of the most important, just ideas that everybody, how you respect and find methods where everybody knows they have a right to say what they want to say, that they have a right to ask for a raise.
So one thing that I learned from Susan Engel, she actually is an alumnus from the Graduate Center. She got her doctorate in psychology from the GC. She's now at Williams College running the Center for Learning there, is that when kids have an epistemic curiosity, they have a thirst for knowledge, they ask lots and lots of questions. If you have a toddler, you know exactly what I mean, right? On average, kids ask 20 questions per hour. When they get to school, they ask 3 questions per hour. And that's just staggering. And so when they come to higher ed, there's all of that unlearning that we have to do, walking that back, undoing K through, like whatever it is about this system, right? So we need to start by changing our classrooms. That's something that we can do. We can put care forward, as Bell Hooks says in Teaching to Transgress, care for the souls of our students. And caring means, things like group office hours, where students also get a chance to learn from one another and talk to each other, find out, oh, you're struggling with this too. It's not just me. Oftentimes, we do that at the very end, like, oh, what's one thing you learned this semester? What's one thing that you'll take with you? And students over and over again, when they say out loud this one thing, they realize, like, oh, the majority of the class is also trying to work on this skill too. And so we could do that earlier. It means including mentoring for the whole student, right? Not just in terms of mental health, but also career services, and thinking about how we can mentor them in numerous ways for their world readiness. Create an environment that supports learning. Rhonda L. Montgomery in Lessons from Plants, another beautiful book, says that when something goes wrong, we're often quick to blame the individual. But when we look at the behavior, human behavior in relationship to plants, we act completely differently, right? If my plant is dying, it is absolutely my fault. There is not enough sunlight, or there's too much sun, there's not enough water, or there's too much water, and we look at the environmental conditions, right, that that plant needs to thrive. So it's also about looking at the systemic racism and oppression, the systemic sexism baked in from the 19th century through to today, that we are working on making an environment in which our students can thrive. So how can we change our classrooms so that every student can thrive? And focusing on meaningful learning outcomes that matter to our students, not just bureaucratic metrics. For example, asking students, what are your learning goals? What do you want to learn from this class? I often like to start my classes on the very first day asking, how is this course going to change your life? I think of this as radical optimism, right? That like, maybe, just maybe, if you give this a chance, this course could radically change your life. There could be one thing that you learn in this course that you take with you for the rest of your life, and that is a victory, right? So as part of it is just, like, as Cathy was saying, working on this book together through a pandemic, through Black Lives Matter protests. I mean, I live right by the Barclays Center, and there were people with riot gear, and we've been through a lot, right? And I think the world is ready for change. Our classrooms are ready to change. And I think that being intentional about systemic change and how we can structure equity into our courses is one way of doing that. All it takes is a few minutes. If you could do the next slide. Transformation in 5 minutes. With one lesson plan from the get-go, like a think, pair, share that we started with, right? And then a couple of minutes at the end of a classroom, at the end of a class meeting to reflect on what was learned. It's something that says, hey, your participation and engagement are expected here from the get-go, and then a review session at the end. And as Cathy said, numerous studies show that that review session, knowing how something was learned, I like to call this lifting up the curtains to show students the string, right? All of the strings, all of the things that we're thinking of behind the scenes, that they're more likely to remember that reflection than they are the content itself. And if you can keep to that, you can transform your classroom even in the most restrictive situations. I sometimes like to think of it as driver's ed, putting students into the driver's seat of their own education to take more of a leading role. It puts them where they're empowered and have more autonomy and control, and it puts the teacher next to them, right? An alert and confident guide in the passenger seat while they learn alongside you.
I'm just going to talk about a couple of models. Carl Wyman, I had the great honor to meet in one of the times that I was asked to keynote the Nobel Prize conference on the future of learning. Unlike me, he actually has a Nobel Prize. He was the 2011 Nobel laureate in physics and a professor of education. He taught at Colorado, University of British Columbia, now at Stanford, and is a huge advocate of active learning and says that, in fact, the kind of traditional learning we're doing is forcing students to hate science. All right. So his passion and his goal is to inspire students to think curiosity and creativity are not antithetical to learning science. He does this quite remarkable thing. First of all, he uses a flipped classroom model. I think everybody knows what that is, so I won't go into that. Basically, you do the reading afterwards, you come into class and you ask a question, and then he uses clickers to find out how many people give the right answer, how many different answers, and then he has people work in groups to figure out why 57% said one answer and 30 said another answer, and what they think is the right answer. And eventually, by the end of the class, they work towards an understanding not just of the answer, but the processes and the information that were needed to come up with an answer. But he does something more, and I really quite love this. He says on the next homework assignment, after one of these classes, he asks students to reflect on one thing they got wrong, something they found wrong or difficult, and then to think about how they would approach the program differently. They also read something new. He teaches physics in the physics class. He does this for introductory classes. He does this for doctoral students at Stanford in physics, right? But there's a constant process of thinking about how you think. How did I make a mistake? Shouldn't be a source of shame, although the 19th century builds shame into any mistake, right? Most of us know where we stood, what our grades are on our permanent record, right? All these are 19th century inventions. Grades are a 19th century invention. But rather to think about if you didn't learn something, that's an amazing tool. How can you learn from your own not learning and figure out how to do better the next time? It's an incredible process. And it's very nice to have a Nobel Prize winner in physics who's such a passionate advocate. If any of you are going home and think there's no way my department would buy this book and give it to your EO. Because it's a book full of research and facts and tables and you name it. Next slide, please. Another person is law professor Sarah Schendel, who teaches at Suffolk University. And she does something very, very interesting. When she does a law exam, she has 2 questions at the end that are required but not graded. She has every student write how much time they spent preparing for the exam. No one has ever asked me on an exam how much time I spent preparing for the exam. She also has them put on their exam. It's required. You fail the exam unless you do that. Oh, I don't know if you fail. Sarah, do you fail? But she also has them write what grade they think they earned on the exam. Then when she turns the exam back again, she has them do a metacognitive experiment for themselves where they look at what they wrote, look at what they achieved, and have to do some serious thinking. If I thought I could get by with an hour and a half of studying for this exam and thought I was going to get an A+ and I got a C, clearly I have to change my attitude about my own abilities, my own test taking, what I learn and don't learn, and vice versa. Right? I've never had anyone ask me these questions, but they're profound questions that students can take with them the rest of their life and way beyond the classroom. Am I up next?
No, I think it's me. So we talked about, 5-minute activities, short activities, things and homework assignments that you can do. Active learning inventory methods like entry and exit tickets, like the ones you've done today and will do today, are how we make the university that's ready for our students, right? Innovative, inclusive, engaging, equitable, democratic. And we have constantly changing ideas of what democracy is. And it's important to examine and reflect on that with students as part of the process. We can do that in short activities like a fishbowl or think, pair, share. A 5-minute transformation is the beginning, right? It's the beginning of anti-racist, inclusive, 100% participation and pedagogy. Then we can dive deeper. Structure equity into the course itself for full course transformation. And here are some methods that we mentioned in the book. I only have time to dive into the last 2. When I taught early American literature at Hunter College, I used a We the People activity on the first day of class. It's participatory, on topic, simple, and transformative. The idea is to critically reflect together about who is included in We the People, what the Founding Fathers meant by we then, and who is included in that we today. It goes like this. Everybody starts standing up, including me. First I say, if you do not identify as male, please sit down. And at this point, I'm sitting down, along with approximately half the class. And it's important that students see me, a cis white woman, supposed authority in the room, sit down first, right? Next I say, if you rent or do not own your apartment or house or wherever you live, please sit down. And in New York City, most people rent, so there are very few people left standing. Finally, I say, if you have any student loans or any debt whatsoever, please sit down. Given the extraordinary cost of college in the US, there is seldom a single student left standing. I've never had a single student left standing. So no one in our class would have been included in We the People. nor in 1789 would they have been considered deserving of the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This irony that to go to college means accruing debt that would prevent you from being considered a citizen with voting rights is not lost on our students. And this injustice informs and transforms the discussion about what we mean by democracy then and now. Once we're all sitting, we talk about race and the 3/5 status of enslaved people. And that's intentional, right? Like I said, it's important to be intentional about structuring equity into our classes. And this is an activity that leads really well into working on a class constitution, right? What goes into making a constitution, or building learning outcomes, or co-creating a syllabus for that full course transformation, to think about how can we include every single learner in this class, every single student. And as a white instructor teaching majority non-white and immigrant students of every imaginable background, I start with the idea of exclusion more generally, and ensure that I am in the first excluded group, and that's important. That very brief and simple activity at the start of a class opens a wider discussion about elitism, privilege, exclusion, inclusion, and citizenship, and how that affects the education systems that we were taught in and that we're in now. It helped us think about, in radically inclusive terms, when we did co-create our syllabus together. And through critically and creatively thinking with my students, I realized my syllabus needs more or options. Next slide, please. So when I invited students to co-create with me, I became a co-learner, and that's when the transformation happened. We were voting on one of the class assignments, whether my students would do bi-weekly reading reflections or a midterm paper. And I started with majority voting, like a typical democratic system, and everyone was leaning toward the lower stakes option. Only one student dissented. She spoke up and said, "No way, I don't want that many deadlines. I cannot keep track of that many deadlines. I would much rather have a higher stakes midterm." One due date on the calendar, and that's it. The rest of the class was quiet and went with the majority. So this was one of those situations as an educator that kept me up all night long. I could not sleep because I felt like I have failed this one student. It does not matter that there are 30 more of them. I am only thinking about this one student, and how could I bring what she had to say into the course? And I realized, all right, I think we need to change the system, right? Next class, we talked about the merits and limitations of majority voting, right? And we moved to a consensus voting system. If one person dissented, we needed to hear them out and make the syllabus better together instead of going with the herd. The result changed the way I build my syllabi forever. I gave students an or option that I've used in every syllabus since. So they can either write one midterm paper or the 6 or 7 bi-weekly reading reflections, lower stakes, and I give them a deadline for letting me know their final decision. In the end, 25% of the class opted for the midterm paper, even though no one had spoken up that day, and one of those students used that midterm paper as her essay to get into graduate school and was admitted. So I think it's really important that we rethink with intentionality the structures and how we can structure equity into our courses, and we can make our syllabi more flexible to cater to every learner. Cathy.
So there's a wonderful organization called the National Association of Colleges and Employers that has done lots of research on what employers want. For the last 30 years, we've had for-profits and others saying that college doesn't matter anymore, that all that matters is vocational training, right? But when they went and actually talked to employers about what they want, it turns out the top 4 things that they want from students today, from their first employees, their starting employees, and people they then promote: critical thinking and problem solving, teamwork and collaboration, professionalism and a work ethic. If you have a research paper that students have to put together on their own, we got it, right? Oral and written communication skills. Wow, right? That is what higher education does. Next slide, please. This is an exercise. I love this because it's a little counterintuitive, This is Shiro Watanachi, who's on the Faculty Career Success Committee at CUNY. She teaches at Queens College. She's an economist. And in her second year level statistics course, she helps her students translate the supposedly vocational, practical statistics into these higher order thinking skills that will help them survive and thrive, not just in statistics, but in everything they do. I can't think of a single course we teach in any field that doesn't have this kind of translation possibility, right? But I think most of us never even think that way, right? Because we've inherited the system where even though 3.5% of students who graduate go on for PhDs, we all think, we've been taught that our students are going on for PhDs. We're very poor, in general, at translating that stuff we are passionate about, all the things we teach, into these skills that will make our students think, what, this is, boy, I just need to get past this exam, right? This is a gut class, this is a hard class, but I just got to get this exam and I'll never think about it again. No. It's so, what did you use that wonderful phrase, radically optimistic. Because it's a way of saying everything we do in college is something that's part of your toolkit that will help you the rest of your life. But that requires us to think about that. Maybe even be a little bit less cynical about ourselves. Maybe think more profoundly about what our curriculum is, what goes in our classes, how we think about our classes, how we think about the purpose of education, how we structure educational programs, right? It always makes me sad that general education courses are the ones students think they have to get through on the way to the real stuff. Wow, what a missed opportunity. What a cynical thing we've done as educators, that we have in so many systems, like what class at 8 o'clock meets this general education requirement and social, right? We do a kind of smorgasbord instead of saying, this is meaty, this is profound, this is life-changing, right? These are big, big think ideas. I next? I am next.
Full course transformation.
Oh, okay, story time, as we say on TikTok. We are all meeting in the Bill Kelly room, right? That's the name of this particular classroom. Bill Kelly was the president of the Graduate Center, and he was interim chancellor for a year, and he's one of the people, along with Louise Lenahan, the subject of the eponymous Louise Lenahan grants in the Futures Initiative, who encouraged me to come to the Graduate Center and to CUNY. And I'm a Chicagoan, so I must admit New York was always like my fantasy, and CUNY was my fantasy. I used to say when I first came here that every bridge and tunnel in New York should have flashing lights that said you're entering the most expensive city in the country, but your kid can get an education here, a great college education here. Amazing. It's a miracle, right? I don't know if we appreciate that enough as New Yorkers. Anyway, Bill had was no longer, he was on sabbatical after having been interim chancellor. And I said to him, how would you like to teach a class with me that's the craziest class anyone's ever taught? He's like, okay. That's cool, right? To be the former chancellor who's willing to take a chance like that, that's pretty amazing. What we did was we chose 15 students, each from a different field. They had to apply to be in the class, each from a different field. They all had to be teaching. And we taught a class, oh gosh, I think it was called The Future of Higher Education. We walked in the first day, we said, hi, I'm Cathy Davidson. I came here with way more fanfare than I deserve, but this is who I am. Everyone knew that, all that. Bill, we introduced Bill. We said, we're gonna leave. We're gonna come back in 45 minutes, and you, who've never met each other, and you're in 15 fields from audiology to French, to art history, to computer science, you're going to come figure out what groups you're going to make, and you're going to come up with a class that's going to change all our lives. The only thing we gave them was a calendar, because nobody can be creative and think about when's spring break, all of that stuff. So we had a calendar. And we came back, and they were like, go away. Bill said, what do we do? I said, we go away. We came back, thank you. We came back, and they made classes that were based on 4 different ideas that they then had their undergraduates do and give feedback on how it worked for the undergraduates all the way up to us, and we were constantly changing the class. At the end of the year, we had a huge event downstairs in that room where all the students from the undergraduate campuses brought in their research projects. 2 quick ones. The art history class became docents, passed posters around all over Brooklyn in Mandarin, Korean, Spanish, Arabic, and became docents for the borough of Brooklyn, and invited people to the Brooklyn Museum to see the Kennedy Wiley exhibit. They also decided they should get extra credit if they brought 5 people who had never been to the museum before. You can imagine there were a lot of grannies. It was really lovely. I don't have photos of it because we didn't ask permission, but these were grannies who were so proud that their grandkids were taking them. Another person who taught computer science invented an app called Jailbreak My Life that ended up winning a New York White. He taught at John Jay. Evan Mashula, he taught a class because when you're incarcerated, you have no control over your life, and suddenly you're let free, and suddenly you have meetings to go to. You don't know the MTA system. You don't know how long things are going to take, and you're back imprisoned again if you don't make those meetings. So his students created that as one of the projects. I don't want to speak for all the students, but it was certainly a class that changed my life, and I think it's important that if we're thinking about life changing, the professor should change too.
I think that's me. Yeah. All right, so take out those flashcards again, and there's going to be a Zoom poll popping up in just a moment for those of you online. Tell us, what do you like the least about teaching?
Again, very quick, 1 minute.
Very quick, yeah.
What is your least favorite thing about teaching? And for people online, we have a poll that has
Lesson prep. Grading.
Is that a consensus? That's pretty astonishing, right? 90% of the people online say that grading is what they like least about teaching. I think we made the point. Take it from here.
I think we also kind of knew that that would be the answer, because definitely my least favorite. So ungrading and alternative assessment, and I'm going to just whiz past this because I want to leave enough time for Q&A. It addresses all of these things in different ways, especially the grading part. There might be more lesson prep the first time you do it, but there's less in the long run. Students spend more time focused on learning and less time about agonizing over a B+, a B-, is it an 87 or an 86? What does that mean? And there's less time spent in office hours focused on grading and more time focused on talking about the exciting stuff, the content, the learning, what students are engaged in and excited about, what's inciting the classroom, right? What's causing a riot in their brains, and like what's making those connections happen. So you, as the instructor, get to spend a little less time grading and agonizing over those things too. One thing that I do is self and peer evaluations where students work together in their groups all semester long, and then they give each other peer feedback and peer review for things to think about as learners going forward. Rubrics that aren't tied to letter grades, shout out to the Teaching and Learning Center for helping me with this in my own syllabi. Instead of saying an A means you did this, a B means you did that, saying excelling looks like this, passing looks like this, not passing looks like this. How can I help you to get from one to the next to the next? And contract grading, Cathy can say more about, but back to that we the people exercise, right? Thinking deliberately about these systems that we put in place, like the ranking and rating. We have been ranked and rated all of our lives. So how do we get students involved in their own self-assessment to empower them to have the education that they want and that they deserve?
Yeah, I think rather than talk about contract grading, which is pretty complicated, I'm going to recommend a book by Susan Bloom, B-L-U-M, called Ungrading. A contract from a class I taught is in that book, and it walks through all the details of how you might try contract grading and what it looks like to do a contract that's based on what students do, and then students do evaluation to make sure that it meets the level of success. But I think instead I want to go on quickly to the next slide. Oh, is that you or me?
Nope, that's you.
Me? Changing the world.
Small task. You got it.
This is a question I love us to think about. What if we in our classrooms, right? We often complain about the institutions, higher education, our department. We have a lot of control over our classrooms. What if we in our classrooms did what we always say we want to do in our mission statements, right? That's a challenge. Next slide, please. In the Transformative Learning in the Humanities seminar funded by Mellon that we taught last year, we used this huge thick book by Bruce Mao, a provocation, not a book that many people thought we would do in an education class. And we did this 3-minute manifesto where Mao says, write down what you want to do with the rest of your life in the next 3 minutes. Write down what you want to do with the rest of your life in the next 3 minutes. And then he says something that kind of makes me tear up when I think about it. He says, people know the future they want. They just haven't been asked. Think about that. Think about doing that in a class sometime. Next slide, please. And then my friend, Farah Jasmine Griffin, at the height of the pandemic, when there was no diagnosis, there were no vaccines, New York was in such turmoil, wrote a beautiful, beautiful essay. She's got a wonderful book called Read Until You Understand. She wrote a beautiful essay in which she said, she asked her students 4 questions during the pandemic. What one book from class would you take with you? What, if anything, from your own life do you want to leave behind? Wow. What do you appreciate that you would like to take with you? What change, if any, would you like to see and commit to bring about on the other side? That's kind of a major, right?
Okay, so we just have one exit ticket to close, and this is something that we like to do in our classrooms as well. What question would you like to ask today? And it's a great exit ticket activity for students. It avoids groupthink, right? Because everyone's writing it down at the same time. So it's not like one question kind of changes the room. Everyone's thinking about their own question that's uniquely theirs. And we try to do this very quickly, so just a few seconds. What's one question that you would like to ask today?
This is another example of metacognition. And if you don't get to ask your question later, ask us on Twitter. We love to learn when everybody's learning. And those are our Twitter hands. So just write down a question you'd like us for today. If you're at home on Zoom, we've been having people taking questions. Have people been writing questions?
Yes.
Tashara?
Ask in
And there
the
are
Q&A.
questions? Great. And I think in the Q&A, we'll ask one question of the live audience and then one question of the Zoom audience. And we've got some questions? Great. So just take 60 seconds and write down what question you'd like to ask today.
And Jonathan Stern, who's at McGill University, he teaches media and sound studies there, does this with 400 students, right? You can do this in a class of any size.
Every class he asks students, he asks an exit question at the end of every class with 400 students. My favorite was one I got to observe where he asked, what did we learn in class today that you're still going to be thinking about when you go to sleep tonight? And if there was nothing, what should we have been talking about today? Because media studies should be keeping us awake. Right? A lot of crazy stuff going on in the media these days. Question? Did everyone have a question down?
And just, again, thank you so much to everyone who showed up. Thank you to all the faculty, students, and administrators who we have learned from, who made this book possible. And we've got some of our favorite titles up there, and there are many more. So,
I think we have about 10 minutes for questions, and we'll take a question first from you. Thank you all for your attention and for being here and for just coming out in this weird world, hybrid world we're living in now, and we're trying to figure out what happens next, as Farah Griffin says. Questions, anybody? What did you write down? Yes, please. Do they need a mic?
we can repeat the question, I think. Ah, thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Well, I think the thing is that, first of all, the 3-minute Mao exercise often tells the student who thinks they have no goals, helps to find it. I like to ask really basic questions. You like to work inside or outside? Most people know the answer to that. Do you like to work at a desk? Do you like to have a boss? Do you like to work with your hands? Do you like to work with your mind? Do you like to work with your feet? Right? You know, so they're really, often we ask the question at such a high level, it's like, what? I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm not sure I still know what I want to do with my life. Right?
One thing I ask students who ask me this oftentimes in office hours is, do you want to make change in an indirect way with maybe a lot of people, but you don't have control over the message or how it's necessarily interpreted? Or do you want to make change on an individual level where you have a little bit more control and one-on-one time and interaction to kind of control that message? And it kind of helps to choose a path.
And thank you for that question, because I think it may be the most profound question we can ask.
Yeah.
And you're totally right. Most people, when asked that question, think, oh, am I supposed to be, you know, they come up with something very, very specific and they don't really know what it is yet. I think the average student, and we think it's changed, but it actually hasn't changed. The average person between the age of 22 and 30 changes jobs 7 times. And that's been constant for about 30 years. You know, so, but no one at 18, especially a young person, they think that everybody else around them knows exactly what they're going to do. And I always love to tell my 18-year-olds, yeah, they know what they're going to do, and then they have a midlife crisis later. And I actually don't mean that cynically. I mean that it means that they finally reached a point in their life when they were able to say, what do I really want to do? And as Mao says, we rarely ask that question. Thank you for asking that question.
Do we have a
We have some online questions, so our FI fellows have grouped them. So this is a question about the syllabus. So many of us have to follow the department structure and requirements, especially as an adjunct. With this in mind, how should we approach syllabus construction?
I'm going to let this be Christina's question, but I just want to say that many of the things in the book are written for adjunct professors and people who think they have no choice at all. And so we're pretty wily about finding ways that you can have choice in situations when you don't have choice, because that itself is a meta question, because most of us in life have pre-scripted and conscripted lives. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question about the syllabus, because there are varying levels of flexibility and tolerance for change depending on what institution you're in and what support you have. And I myself am very familiar with, at one point in time, I had 2 jobs as a student employee and as a graduate research assistant. And I was also teaching on 2 different campuses in different states. Sometimes on the same day. That was a big commute, and I also was working on a dissertation. So I am very familiar with this, and I think that it's important, and every step of the way in this book, I said, okay, how are we going to do this with someone who has 20 minutes on a subway ride to get to class and needs a lesson plan? And so one thing that I like to do with learning outcomes is to ask students, if you could add your own learning outcome, what would it be? Because there's no restriction in terms of adding a personalized learning outcome. And there are some wonderful profs out there who use ungrading. I learned from one of the transformative learning and the humanities fellow this practice, Michael Greer, who does a letter at the beginning of the semester. Write me a letter telling me what you want to do in this class, what you want to learn, and how you want to grow in this class. And then at the end of the semester, she gives them back the letter and asks them to assess how close did you come to reaching your own goals. And that's 10% of their final grade, because she has that support, right? But that can also inform how you approach grading and involve students in the learning outcomes.
But very few classes that have even the most rigid syllabi that can't have something. What did I do with it? I lost my mic. That don't have something to do. There's somebody wonderful on Twitter that every day asks a math question, and he asks people how they would answer it. Yesterday it was like, how would you do mental math and add 54 and 67? that seems pretty standard, right? And it turned out there were like 300 different ways that people used. And his point is, it's not about getting the right answer, it's understanding there are lots of different pathways to the right answer. And I believe that's true even in the most static syllabus in classes. One reason I love Carl Wyman's book so much is he's a physics professor, right? And well, of course, physics has many, many areas of creativity, no question about that, but we don't think of that, right? We often think about prescribed syllabi in certain fields. There are many creative things that we can do. Here, yes, Luke, please.
So I'm curious about the process of writing this book during the pandemic, which we all learned so much about teaching and learning during the early stages of the pandemic. I've never seen so many conversations about pedagogy in the university. This is a weird kind of golden moment for those of us who build our life around that. But I'm curious. I don't anticipate that you changed anything fundamental about the book. Because both of your pedagogy travels across space and time. But I am curious about the conversations you had about maybe leaning into certain sections harder or challenging yourselves in ways to think about approaches that are new or are more accommodating to the reality around us. What can you tell us about that experience?
Oh, thank you for that. That's a beautiful question, Luke. For me, it was so essential that the book not be by me. I mean, I've had an amazing long career. Who needs to hear from that? That was funny. I mean, I knew it was absolutely essential to write with somebody who, I'm going to make her embarrassed, I knew was brilliant and thoughtful, who'd won teaching awards, who'd published on teaching, and who was teaching, I know, I'm doing something so mean to Christina, but who was teaching in 2 different states on the same days and had a tiny baby and all of those things. So the combination from 2 ends of a profession were really, really important. And I spent 3 years getting my first job. I don't have fancy degrees. I went through all of those things too. So it was great for me to remember what that felt like and to go back to that. But I think one of the things for me that was most important, we keep hearing about mental health and our students' mental health. Totally take that completely seriously, full stop. And I think if you don't have a mental health problem now, you're not paying attention. We live in a wacky world. Oh, I almost said a bad thing. With the chancellor here, I almost said a terrible thing. We live in a pretty messed up world. So taking really, really seriously the psychosis of Pakistan, and a third of the country, Indonesia underwater. My sister lives in Livermore, California, and she texted me today, it was 113 degrees yesterday. If we don't take that, plus racial injustice, Supreme Court, if we don't take that really seriously, something is so wrong with this. And I think the pandemic, for horrific that it was, and I know everybody in this room has lost somebody, I certainly have, the pandemic said, stop, right? This is not academic. This is the friggin' world, right? We have to do something. We have to change. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to our institutions. We owe it to society. We owe it to our students. So for me, there was like not a break. There was, by B-R-A-K-E. There was no, I felt like there had to be no stopping. And whatever we did, we had to push even further. And I was very lucky to work with somebody who was as passionate as I was. And we made it almost a religion that every Tuesday and Thursday we were going to meet. And we wrote every word together. We fought. We rewrote every word together. It was an amazing, amazing experience and exercise. But definitely the sense of crisis was like, if not now, never.
I think what was remarkable is that the whole world was asking, how do we engage our students, right? And I was teaching in fall 2020 online, and so much was happening, and there was so much fear, and I thought, I'm going to teach Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower because it's so relevant. And then, oh my God, she was so right about so many things. I knew she was a genius, but like even more so a genius. And it was also too much. right? It was too real. It was overwhelming and so I took very seriously learning more about trauma-informed pedagogy. And that went to, at the time, the world was literally on fire. Record fires around the world, Australia especially, and it was very important to think about climate crisis and people who have been dispossessed, and trauma-informed teaching became a really important part of that for me, and I think for everyone in a classroom or a Zoom room. But as you know, at the Teaching and Learning Center, and as many active learning advocates know, it just made the stakes higher, that active learning is even more important than ever. And that the things that you can't just take what you were doing in the classroom and then just do it online. You have to think thoughtfully about those, how to restructure, how to be thoughtful about, I think when we had started writing, it was about online adaptations. And they were no longer adaptations. It was just very real, on-site and online, how this would work and how to try to make that magic of the classroom happen. And I think putting care forward a pedagogy of care became ever more important and forward, and trying to also think about accessibility and bandwidth at home, and trying not to build an activity that would be too invasive of students' privacy, knowing that there are all kinds of sounds in the background, right? Not asking them to make themselves visible. That engagement does not have to be visual. It can be many different kinds of engagement, and thinking more broadly about what engagement means meaningfully, so, yeah.
We have some more online questions.
Maybe one more question online, and then
Sure.
because you've all been incredibly attentive and patient.
So the question is, I'm entirely sympathetic to rethinking grading, but many students and institutions use grades as a criteria for entry into postgraduate study, professional schools, grad schools, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we encourage postgraduate institutions to reconsider the importance of grades so we do not disadvantage our students?
Absolutely. I think it's very essential, and we've talked a lot about moving from the classroom to career and thinking about what is it that will benefit our students the most in the long run. And so I often think about transformation as planting a seed, right? That it might not necessarily mean, showing up at the table and throwing the whole thing over at first, but planting a seed and trying to make systemic change happen, and think about how we could think more widely about transforming programs, transforming institutions. And there are institutions doing this, but it has to be done thoughtfully, because it's important that students can achieve what they want to when they graduate. Cathy, do you want to add to that?
I think not. I think it's time to say thank you all for being here, for caring enough to come out, for all you do. I mean, I think that you spent time today when there are a million other things you could have been doing. To be here certainly makes me feel proud and optimistic, in the sense that we have very big challenges ahead, but I think we have the mettle to do it. And I know our CUNY students do. I know our CUNY, just by being CUNY students, they have a kind of energy and a will that's pretty astonishing, pretty humbling. So just thank you all for being here, and thank you for everything you do day in and day out. You are appreciated and loved, and thank you.
Thank you, Cathy and Christina. That was really astounding. So at this point, we want you to continue the conversation and the questions. So you can tweet the authors, you can share it on your social media, you can actually get the book as well. So we actually have some books available here for purchasing. If you're interested in purchasing a book, please do so. And the authors are very happy and delighted to actually sign the book. Thank you.